Today on our show, we're going behind the wheel to review Baby Driver. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Who's that in Poison Ivy's garden? It's Kevin Smith and Marc. Two fat men on Batman.
Hey everybody, it's me, Marc Bernardin. Kev is off doing Kev stuff, as Kev is wanting to do. So it is just me. And I figured if you're going to talk about a movie that takes place predominantly behind the wheel, then what better place to do it than behind the wheel? So yeah, I'm going to talk about Baby Driver, which I saw last night. It's open already, so there are going to be some mild spoilers here, but not crazy town spoilers. And also, it's not a kind of movie that it's about the surprise. It's not about, ultimately, plot contrivances or character reveals or any of that stuff. It is about the experience of this movie. And the experience of this movie is kind of amazing, because the thing that it does better than any movie I've ever seen before is the idea of fusing music and action together. Like, it's a kinetic experience, the likes of which I haven't really seen before. And the use of music within the scene. It's a fancy film term called diegetic, but it's the characters within the scene are listening to the music that the audience is also listening to at the same time. And so the fusing of those two things together makes for an incredibly immersive experience. And the car chases in this movie, there are 3 or 4 really big ones, and they are among the best I've ever seen. And there is something so incredibly pleasurable about that, that it's hard to discount. And one of my foundational influences are the twin pillars of Knight Rider and Dukes of Hazzard. Those 2 shows were on the air when I was a kid, and I am all about the pleasures of the car chase. I am all about movies like Ronin and movies like Road Warrior and movies like the first couple of Jason Bourne films, where what they're doing is they're putting you behind the wheel and they're making that experience visceral for you. And Baby Driver does that in an incredibly good way. I will say that when I went into this movie, I was excited about this movie as any movie that I could think about this year. And when I sat down at the beginning of it and strapped in, like, I was giddy, like, just tickles up my spine, because the first opening scene is amazing. It's scored to this John Spencer blues explosion track called Bell Bottoms that's just all kinds of bottom thump and deep funk, and it's guitars and weirdo Elvis in the middle, and it's kind of great. And just watching Ansel Elgort, who, despite that name, seems to have made himself a movie star, or maybe that's the only way you get to survive that name, is by being a movie star. But just watching him behind the wheel and watching him do, as the movie posits, the one thing he does better than anybody else, which is drive, is incredible. It's an unbelievable sequence. And the movie is basically about this kid named Baby, B-A-B-Y, Baby, who at some point in his youth, his parents both died in a car accident. There's a little bit of Peter Quill to his origin story, in that his parents both die. His mom was a singer, but she leaves for him, or the one memory he has of her is the iPod she gave him for his birthday, and a tape that he's made of her singing the Commodore's Easy, like Sunday morning. So his sort of origin story is tragedy. And of course, a tragedy that happened in a car behind the wheel. And that's what he feels, and that's what propels him forward. And at one point, he boosted a car that belonged to Kevin Spacey's Doc. Everybody gets code names, Doc. And so Doc caught him and decided that, well, if this kid was ballsy enough to steal my car, then you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hire this person. Not even so much as hire, more like indentured servitude. Baby belongs to Doc until he works off the cost of the heist. And as the movie opens, he's finishing a job. He's got one more to go before he's clear, and then he gets to be his own man again. And you know, the first heist that he's on, there's John Hamm and his girlfriend Elsa Rodriguez, I believe her name is, are playing, bank robbers, and they're going in to rob a bank. And John Barenthal, who's all tatted up and awesome. Casting in this movie is bananas. But to just watch those characters have fun, to watch those characters kind of cut loose and just be bad, unrepentantly bad, and kind of, attractively bad, the way that Americans love their movie villains, which is there's a seduction to it. You want to be bad with those people, and that's the magnetism of a movie like this. And so they go on a heist goes off well, Baby's got one more job, then he meets a girl. He meets a girl named Deborah who works at a diner, played by Lily James, who is attractive and sort of dewy and awesome in the way that, again, like femme fatales, not even femme fatales, just femmes in movies like this are. She represents the innocence that was lost when he was a boy, and you absolutely understand why he's attracted to her, because she's a movie star and she's beautiful and she's attentive to him, and despite the fact that Baby almost never talks, she manages to get some sense of personality out of him and all of that stuff. And it's really fun and it's really sweet. And so, of course, Baby's got one last job to do. This job goes a little bit awry because of the presence of a fellow named Bats, played by Jamie Foxx, who is hell on wheels, does not pay for anything that he could kill the person who owns it to get, does not believe ultimately in any sense of morality. The whole system as built by Doc is one of a code. Like, there's a way to do this and there's a way not to do this, and the way to do this is professionally and not emotionally, but do not expose yourself to risks that do not pay off at the end. Bats does not care about any of those risks and will kill and maim and blast his way through everything to just get what he wants. Naturally, this will end poorly for him, and ultimately also poorly for Baby. So, and that's sort of the movie. It's a series of heists linked together by the story of a guy who is learning to connect to the world that he had kept hidden behind a pair of eardrums and a condition called tinnitus, which, if you've ever been to a rock concert, if you've ever been out way too late at a club, if you've ever been in a bar that's just packed to the gills with people and trying to shout over them, it's that ringing in your ears that you get when everything has been too loud for too long. For Baby, that condition is heightened and worsened and amplified to the point where, as it says in the trailer, he's got a hum in the drum and he uses the music to drown it out. And the music is also what partially helps him be the best getaway driver in the world. So that's the story of this movie. And the story of this movie, it's I'm not going to say it's deep. It doesn't have to be deep. This is not a movie that is aiming for depth, and that's fine. The problem of this movie for me, despite all of the pleasures that I talked about, despite all of the tickles that you get in a film like this, is that there's a sense of, you want the Cornetto trilogy, as we remembered, Edgar Wright, writer-director, the things that he does and the things that he does so well, is both marry this visual invention that honestly nobody else, for my money, puts on the screen, with, at least in the Cornetto trilogy, his other three films, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, the Cornetto trilogy, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and World's End, plus Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. They are all about arrested development. They're all about men who are unable or unwilling to move beyond their adolescence, which is a powerful thing. And Simon Pegg is a fantastic avatar for that sort of thing, and Michael Cera just perennially looks like he's never hit puberty. And that as a theme helps those visual elements, helps that invention to stick together in a way that makes it incredibly enriching as an experience to watch. This movie also has that in a way, but because Baby is such a taciturn character, we're never really invited inside his world. We don't know really what life is like inside his head. We don't know the things that he's fighting against internally that also inform his external world. And as a result, this movie always kind of has you at arm's length in regard to the main character. I mean, his wants are very simple. It's like, I want to get in a car with this girl and drive until we get away from all of our problems, which I get. But what the movie didn't give me was the sense of what it's like to be this guy, and what is his internal conflict that mirrors with his external conflict. For me, if you're going to posit a film that has a character who is the best in the world at a thing that has brought him nothing but heartache and separation from everybody in his life, that's tragic. That's and that he's the best at it, and that he actually enjoys doing it. Like, that's kind of great if you play into that. If you make that part of the story. If you make the story, here's a person who's the best in the world at getaway driving, hates the fact that he has to do it, but also loves doing it, and what that presents to him as both the cause of his confinement socially and emotionally, as well as the release for that, as well as his get out of jail free card is the car keys and the accelerator. That's kind of great. The movie kind of presents itself a little bit as a musical, and that the car chases are the big music numbers, which is a really interesting way to go, and has the potential for a lot of just flair. Like you look at something like Scott Pilgrim, which is nothing but a visual feast for the eyes. This movie doesn't quite have that, and I was hoping for a little bit more inside Baby to be put on the screen so that we know what it feels like for this guy when he's behind the wheel, not just what it looks like. What is the charge he gets when he drives? And like I said, when he drives, it's great. When the movie is not with him behind the wheel or not in the middle of an action sequence, it has this slight twinge of, like, do you remember after Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction came out, and every other movie, especially every other independent movie, was like a Tarantino knockoff, where everybody was like wearing black suits and sunglasses, and everybody was just pop culture pitter-patter and all that stuff? I'm not saying that this is as bad as some of those early Tarantino knockoffs, or even the latter-day Tarantino knockoffs, but it's very familiar. There's absolutely a sense that you've seen this sort of thing before. You've seen, criminals with code names who crack wise and have, fancy dialogue and feel heightened in a way that lends to, if not caricature, but cartoon. And I say cartoon in the best way, in a not at all pejorative way. Like, there is nothing wrong with a great cartoon. And I feel like there was a way in which Edgar could have pushed this so that it felt like an amazing cartoon. Which I think is kind of what you want from a movie like this. You want that, physics-defying, emotionally heightened, pulpy, just adrenaline ride that something like a great cartoon can give you. This film doesn't quite get there. Or when it gets there, it's sporadic. And you just want to live in that world more than visit that world. Like when I came out of it, I felt like this movie tickled a lot more than satisfied. And there's nothing wrong with a good tickle. I'm not saying that tickling is a bad thing. I'm just saying that what I wanted was just a little bit more steak to go with the incredibly awesome sizzle. All of this is not to say that I didn't like this movie. All of this is to say that I just wanted more from this movie, that there's a road this movie started to go down that I wish it continued down that path and gave me just a little bit more of this. But for all of that, like, listen, you're going to spend at least I spent $16 to see this movie. And you will not regret having spent $16 to see this movie. And the reviews have all been rapturous and overwhelmingly great. And there is always a sense of compare and contrast when you look at stuff like that, like in a landscape where it's opening the week after Transformers, and it's been a month since Wonder Woman, and hoping and wanting something that feels like a real movie and that just not feel like a franchise starter or a reboot or a remake or a brand extension or a marketing win, but feels like actual cinema. This delivers on that. This is not a movie that you've seen before, put together in this way. Like it's in the same way that Tarantino pulls from his influences. Like, Tarantino is a mixtape filmmaker in that, and in the best way, he takes some of the things he loves, he synthesizes it together into a thing you hadn't seen before, but you're always able to recognize the influences. Same thing with Edgar Wright. Like, you can absolutely see the things that he's drawing from. You can see the driver and Ronin, and you can see, Le Samurai and all of the great sort of heist movies and con movies and driver movies and road movies all put in a blender, made it to an awesome soundtrack, by the way. Like, I didn't even talk about that. And it's the kind of soundtrack, and the brilliance of the soundtrack is that it's a needle drop soundtrack. Needle drop being the term that you use when we're dropping the needle on this record, and here's a song that's going to play, we're going to pick up the needle, and then we're moving on. And that's kind of what the score is. What he does is, not only does he choose songs that you've never heard of before, or, unless you're like super deep cut, I got a wall of vinyl in my house and I know all of these tracks, but he also chooses songs that were samples, like the origin for samples in other songs that are bigger and more famous that you already know and love. Like David McCallum's The Edge is the chief sample for Dr. Dre's The Next Episode. There's a track in there that's also the sample, one of the key samples for a De La Soul song called Say No Go. There's the Harlem Shuffle that, the Rolling Stones covered. Tequila is in it, but not the Tequila by the Champs, but a Tequila by another band who was covering the Champs. And so it's these songs that are familiar, but in versions you haven't heard before, and they all work in and amongst and with the emotional texture of the movie. And it's a great experience. It's a textual experience. The thing that I just wish for this movie was that it was a little bit more of an emotional experience. And an emotional experience that was driven by your main character. Driven, I made puns. So, listen, you're going to go see this movie. You're going to enjoy this movie. You're going to feel a charge out of this movie. You're going to feel a release out of this movie. You're going to sit back and wonder why people don't make more movies like this. Because, again, it is cars and highway. In the same way we talked about Batman before, it's like it's at its core, it's a detective thing. This is a genre. This is a discipline that has been part of Hollywood for as long as there have been cars. Let us put a person behind the wheel who does something we've never seen a person do before, and let's build the kineticism of an everyday object that everybody has the command of, a car, and turn it into a thing, and have a person do something behind the wheel of that object that you've never seen done before. And this movie delivers on that level, absolutely. And you know me. Like, if you've been watching Fat Man on Batman long enough, you know me. That I can still have the twin poles of, here's a thing that I found enjoyment in, here's a thing that I thought achieved what it set out to achieve, and delivered an entertainment experience that I think you'll be satisfied with. But I still felt that there was a little bit wanting from it. And that is the awesome thing about being able to keep two ideas in your head at the same time, is that, it can also be both things. It can be an incredible cinematic experience. It can be a well-earned night out, but it can also be a learning thing. It can also be a let's look at it and see what it might have done to just get over a little bit more of a hump. But if you're going out this weekend to see a movie, if you're going out this weekend for a good time, you could absolutely do far, far worse than Baby Driver. In fact, I hear there's a Transformers movie in the theaters that I cannot work up the enthusiasm to see because life is too short for the fifth iteration of a movie that was only really ever good once. Instead, go see a movie that you haven't seen before that will tickle, and hey, who doesn't love a good slap and tickle, right? So that's it for this week's show. Kevin will be back shortly, and we will get into it. We will also deliver later a review of War for the Planet of the Apes, which I also saw, but which comes out a little bit later, so we'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, for Fat Man on Batman, I've been Marc Bernardin, behind the wheel, probably breaking like a dozen traffic laws, but don't tell anybody. So come back soon, same fat time, same fat channel, smodcast.com or youtube.com/Kevin Smith. Peace!